my gallows and build them high. Makes a long time climbing before I die. I want the chance to spit in his eye. Oh, well, they gave me bars, but I can see between to a dusty yard and long gone green. They call that freedom, if you know what I mean. And I drown my sorrows, but the whiskey's gone.
Hi, I'm Matty. Before we start tonight's episode of Heidbangers, I should tell you that it contains some descriptions of domestic violence and may trigger some people. And it is a mental health podcast. And as always, we would let you know that we're not mental health experts. So if you feel that you're affected by anything that's discussed, please seek appropriate help and don't rely on us. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Heidbangers. This is episode 15. I'm Matty. I'm joined tonight by Charlie. Charlie, how are you doing?
Not bad, mate. How are yourself?
Very good, mate. Very good. Just enjoying the warm weather.
That's class. Went on a walk there before we started and it was nice.
Nice one. I'm also delighted to join on for the first time, Jeff Ashton. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And nice to meet you guys. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for taking your time out your evening to come and join us and talk to us, I suppose, to kind of introduce you and why you're on tonight's episode. You have a career as a homicide detective, and you're going to talk to us a little bit about sort of some of the cases that you dealt with domestic abuse. Do you want to give a bit of background, or do you want to kind of jump into one of the cases? How do you want to start?
A wee bit of background. I was 30 years and 4 days as a police officer. About 27 of those was as a detective. You had to go back in uniform for a short while when you got promoted as a sergeant. So that was my penance at Todmorden. Everybody had brown eyes and looked at you when you had blue eyes. Strange place. So I listened to the podcast you did with the male victim of the domestic abuse, domestic violence, whatever it was domestic violence in my day. It's domestic abuse now.
Mm-hmm.
And it rung so many bells, and I'm sure the people out there that can benefit from one, knowing the warning signs, and there's plenty of stuff on the internet that tells you what the warning signs are, and also to give an insight into what actually means when there's a victim, and I'm talking about the top end of the domestic abuse. I dealt with the murders as I got up in my career. Early doors, I deal with he slapped me, or he's threatened the kids and stuff like that. And my first ever call that I went to in London when I started was a domestic abuse incident. And it ended up with me getting a knife through my tunic in a darkened room.
Yes.
And this was a woman, an Irish woman who was drunk, and she was about 18 stone, and there were no lights. All the lights had been knocked off. I could hear her whimpering in the bathroom. And of course, being the new boy, my mate just shoved me through the door, tried to shine the torch, and I felt this thunk. And then, we found a light switch, and there's attached to this knife was this big, mad, drunken woman, and we grabbed her and, restrained her. And in the bathroom was her 9-stone wet-through boyfriend who had been battered, absolutely battered. So my first domestic abuse incident was female on male, which was unusual. And it continues to be unusual. And it was nice to hear the chap on your podcast talking about, left nothing out there, told us everything was quite thin. So anyway, so I ended up on the homicide team in West Yorkshire. And before I got promoted to Cumbria, 5 out of the last 6 murders I dealt with or was involved with were domestic abuse murders. And the victims are all women, just for clarity. So I thought I could talk about what it means, what the signs are, what led up to the murders, and the main factors that your listeners can relate to, and also look out for people who they might know, they might suspect are victims, male and female, and do what I can to help, and if anyone wants to DM me, I did run a private investigation business when I retired with my brother-in-law, and we dealt with a few stalking cases, which is another, people can't let go, unflushable, I call them. And we gathered the evidence for the people, and also kids being abused by the partner when they've got access to the kids for a couple of days. We got the evidence for that. So I've covered everything, and it's just talk about it without scaring people, because we dealt with the top end. I can talk through statistics, but that's me in a nutshell. Anyway, talk about murder.
You mentioned there are 5 out of the 6 cases being domestic abuse murders. Were there any sort of common themes? But in the cases, like trends, they kind of mark them out like that.
Well, obviously, the definition of domestic abuse is somebody known to you, you live with, you've got a relationship, or but the common theme amongst all of them, and it's something I've underlined in the notes I've got scattered around, is control. It's all about control. The minute they lost control, whether that be through the partner, saying I'm going to leave you, or leaving them, because on one of the cases I dealt with, she'd actually reported him to the police, and had, kicked him out, and he ambushed her at a pub and killed her there. So it's all about control. They lost control of the money, of the person, the children. It's all in their heads, the control. One of them, he hadn't actually lost control. She just didn't reply to his text messages when she was on a night out with someone he didn't like, who he didn't trust, and thought she was messing around. And she didn't answer the text messages and came home and was bludgeoned to death with a lump hammer.
Jesus.
So it's control. That's the big thing I would say is, you look at all the things about domestic abuse, all the forms it takes, whether it's coercive, sexual, money, reading your text messages, cutting you off from your friends. What does it all boil down to? Control. Absolute control, and it says more about the abuser than the person being abused, that they've got to have that control. So it's about their personality. But a lot of them find people who they seem to be drawn to people they can control in a lot of the times. So it's not all the time, and I'm not saying everybody who's ever been abused is wanting to be controlled. That's not what I'm saying. But in these particular cases, certainly 2 of them, the girls in question hadn't led a very good life. They'd gone from partner to partner, and they've not been treated well, and the final one they've ended up with is the one that's killed them. So so there we go. So anyway, what I can talk about, the first one I'm going to talk about is and this is the classic control one. So the instance, he's been in jail for abusing this woman before. He gets out on probation, and his terms of the probation are not to contact her, blah blah blah, report to the police station. He's got a history of violence against everybody. He's a horrible individual. He finds out where she's living, and he manages to wheedle his way back into the relationship, tell her she's the best thing ever. And they're living on a terraced house in a small town in England. Either side of them, they've got neighbours. The walls are quite thin. The neighbours can hear what's going on. So he reverts back to type. So she was sent out to get his cider every day from the local corner shop, and she'd turn up with a black eye, swollen cheek, missing a tooth one time. All the classic signs. The neighbours could hear what was going on. Police were called. She didn't want to pursue a prosecution. This was before you could do victimless prosecutions, where Bobby's turned up the cameras, and you've got carnage in the front room. You've got the 999 call, all the stuff, And even if she didn't want to assist the prosecution, you still charge them. This was before then.
Yeah.
So a lot of agencies were involved. Social services. She had a child, not by him. Child wasn't treated very well either. She had every agency under the sun involved, and yet she still managed to die. So what happened? She got a job. He lost control over her, his cider fetcher, and so she got a job at a care home nearby. And so just to set the scene, so the neighbours got fed up of ringing the police, and because nothing happened, so they didn't bother ringing the police. He knew that one side in particular were ringing the cops. So he'd get his the victim in this case, and sit her on the sideboard, on the draining board, which is adjacent to the wall, and have really rough sex with her, because he knew they could hear next door. She didn't want to have rough sex, but they They don't. So they'd be hearing this. They had a teenage daughter who he'd also make lewd comments to, and there's certain things I may not have let him get away with. So that's the sort of thing. So anyway, she goes to work that night, and there's CCTV of her coming home from work at 8 o'clock. And by the time she reached the house at about 9:15, she was dead. Came through the door. This was a sledgehammer. Killed her. Sat with the body for a while, then rang the police saying, I've come home, I've been burgled, and I found my partner dead. So 2 uniformed cops are dispatched and find the Texas Chainsaw type massacre, blood. If you're into blood pattern analysis, it was a classic, scene, without going into gory detail, but it was, where the hammer goes up, blood comes off it, spatters on the ceiling, do the stuff. 2 cops turn up, a female officer and a male officer. Guess which one noticed the washing machine was on the go when they turned up?
The male one.
No, don't do that. No, it's stereotypical here. No. So she noticed that the washing machine was on, which is a bit, and anyway, so he gets arrested because of his previous violence, and there was no sign of a break-in. And so she could only be identified by DNA. She was unrecognizable. That's a common theme. The last, the 5 I dealt with, 3 of them have been disfigured. So if, you couldn't, identify by tattoos or dental records or DNA in her case. Yeah, pretty bad. He got found guilty. He pleaded guilty eventually when he got to court. But yeah, just an awful case where the authorities, and I'm including the police in this, we let her down. She was left with this animal to be abused, and as soon as he lost control, she got a job, which meant she'd probably have some of her own money, and he wasn't with her 24 hours a day, making sure she didn't. That was it. That was a death sentence.
So at what stage of proceedings do you get involved with that then? So is it, they have the 2 uniformed cops that go there and find it. Do they then escalate it to say, right?
Yeah, once they're there, the control room would probably put the on-call senior investigating officer on standby saying, we've probably got a dead body for you. So the cops would go, yeah, it's dead, and we're going to arrest this guy. We need a full forensic team, senior investigating officer, the whole shooting match. This was about 11 o'clock at night when I got involved. I got the call. I was at home in bed saying, we've got a domestic, I think it came through as, just a domestic murder, which really winds me up. It's never just a domestic murder.
Yeah.
There's so many ripples from it. So I get involved. I was a deputy senior investigating officer on that one. I had a boss above me. And so we get involved. We go, we cordon off the scene. We get, the suits that you see with the gloves, and we go in and, yeah, she's dead. The ambulance crew had already been and said she's dead, trashed the scene, come out again. Then we find out she's got a daughter, and there's, we got another homicide there. So we have to do a quick search of the scene to make sure there's not a dead kid, and there wasn't. The kid was stopping at grandma's that night because mother was working. So only one death, which was a real relief. So then you do all the forensic stuff with him. You bag his clothing that he's got on, you fingernail scrapings, all the stuff you see on the telly. It's not a lot different to that, but it just takes longer. You've never got the staff. And then I interviewed the 2 officers who had attended one by one separately, just to get their initial. And it was during that debrief at 6 in the morning. I made the female officer a cup of tea, give her a biscuit, sat her down. We've been up all night. Through the scene again. We're going to get a statement from you, but just walk me through. And that's when she said, the washing machine was off. I went, washing machine. So would you believe there's a washing machine-ologist out there who can dismantle the washing machine, get the memory out, do all sorts? I didn't till I dealt with this case. Yeah, it was amazing. This guy who lives for washing machines comes out, he's get it from the scene, bring it to the garage in the police station, and he's like all these Christmases at once. He's helping with a murder. And he's got this washing machine, and he says, yeah, this, and he measures the floor water from the house, and without going into boring you. But it was quite interesting. And we found bits of glass and bits of her hair and bits of other stuff in the, whatever the pipe is that comes out, the flow pipe. Yeah, so yeah, all enough. The funny thing about this case was we had to prove that the neighbours could hear what they heard. So they heard the sounds of her being killed, which sounds awful. And you're that neighbour, and you can hear sledgehammer on flesh. So to back up their statement, we had to prove that they could hear that particular sound. So the nearest thing to human flesh is a pig. Pig, So we got a pig carcass, and we had a sound expert setting it all up next door and hitting the pig carcass with a sledgehammer and prove that you can hear. This is all the detail you have to go into to make sure that this, what's a polite word, this offender, goes to jail. Because what you're doing is the person who's dead hasn't got a voice. So you're the voice for the dead person. So you do the very best you can for her family, the kid, that this, you get justice for them. So that's what it's about. It's about getting justice for the person. So yeah, that was just one. And, it was a real tragic case. They're all tragic, but child without a mother, grandparents are saying, well, her mother, but the child's grandparents are saying, how did you let this happen? And as the SIO and deputy SIO and family liaison, you have to go to the family and say, there'll be a case review because there's been contact with the authorities, within a couple of weeks of her death, and you have a serious case review, and nobody came out of it well. Uniform cops that went could have done a better job. Probation should have done a better job. Social services should have done a better job. And that was a classic one where just every little bit contributed to that young girl's death.
How do you brace yourself to get out of bed at 11 o'clock at night and go and see a murder scene? That must be mental.
Yeah, I used to ask myself that question. Am I and some of my team, are we abnormal in that you can get you out of bed and go to a murder scene? And when it involves children, it does, it hits you in the stomach. And I'm trying not to sound too callous, but when it's adults, you just do the best for them. What is in the back of your mind is that, as I said, they've got no voice. So you're doing the best. You click into detective mode, put your suit, shirt and tie on, get your scene suit on, and just do it what's best for them. Each scene is different. And in SIO school, Senior Investigating Officer school, you only get one chance for the scene. So if you bollocks it up and think, oh, I wish I'd done some forensic examination, or I wish I had fingerprinted the handrail that goes up to prove that there's no one else there, no other fingerprints, stuff like that. You've got to. We had the scene for about. We had that house for 3 months. We didn't release it to the council, and we actually found bare footprints in blood going up the stairs, which didn't have any carpet on, because he's always. A lot of these houses, they're always in the middle of DIY. You can picture the scene. So we were taking the stairs up and taking them to the lab and saying, right, there's a footprint in blood here. What can we do with it? It's her blood. Is it his footprint? So if you imagine you get a roll of paper and you roll it across the room so it's spread out, and then we painted his feet with ink and got him to walk like a frieze all the way down to prove it was his footprint in the blood, because he's seen it's the burglar. The burglar must have taken his shoes and socks off, when he burgled the house. Because that happens all the time. So the original question was, how do you prepare yourself? The first couple are always the worst, because you don't know. It's that death, and some of them are quite smelly. Not the domestic ones I dealt with, but they've been there for months in front of an open fire, electric fire. So you've got flies, you've got the smell, bodies are distended. Nothing prepares you, but you know that you're doing the best for them, and you don't want to let them down. And we've had people being sick at the scene, going outside and that's true. It's the smell that you cannot get off the telly. You can recreate it, but when you walk through the door, you can smell death, and in various stages of decay. So I was cycling today, and I was cycling past a field. I thought, something dead in there, badger or a sheep. It's just like, I'm retired 10 years now, but you never forget that smell.
Yeah.
How do you prepare yourself? You just get out and do it. You're generally not the first on scene. So if somebody's been there before you, which is, always handy. Gives you an outline of where the body is. Are there any booby traps, lying around? So yeah, you just, you adopt the persona of the grim-faced murder squad detective, as we used to jokingly call ourselves. And when you're briefing the people on the perimeter, because they've got to watch the scene to keep its integrity, you say, do not smile when the cameras are there. You can tell each other jokes now, but people, not so much in those days, but nowadays with mobile phones,
Yeah.
film, do not smile, do not, I don't know, you've seen it yourself, it's just unprofessional, and it's unprofessional towards the victim and their family. So, yeah, so the call would come through. Mrs., my wife Alex, who's also a police officer, would roll her eyes, turn over. I'd take the call, say, I'll ring you back in 2 minutes, put the phone down, go have a piss, because it always needed a piss. It's like, you try to take a call and
Yeah, always.
it's always like, so then bring them back, say, right, give me the details, and then you just take it from there, call out who you need to call out, and give them advice at the scene. That was an obvious one to go out to. Sometimes it's a bit, well, do I need to go out to this one? It's 3 a.m, it's snowing, I'm up early again in the morning, but generally you always went, because if you didn't go and it was a murder or a suspicious death, you get slaughtered.
Yeah.
And quite rightly so. So yeah, that's how you do it. Just to digress, the last dead body I dealt with was a 18-month-old child, and that's when I decided I was going to retire, because it was Saturday afternoon, Liverpool Hospital, all day, where you had to do all the paediatric forensic postmortems, and I thought, that's me done. I had about 12 months to doing the job. You could stop on and go for the next rank and the next rank. I thought, it's Saturday afternoon, it's sunny, people are out there having a fun, and we are dissecting a small child, and it's just like, it's always the kids that get you in the end. Yeah. So that's how you do it. Yeah. So yeah, does that answer the question, Charlie? Where does he go? Can't see.
Yeah. Aye. No, it does. Aye. You make it sound easy, but it's definitely not easy.
It becomes, as I said, the first one or two, depending on what they are as well. And when I was at training school in Hendon in London, you had to go to a mortuary to see a dead body before, to prove that this is a dead body on the slab. And we had one or two faint just looking at a dead body on the slab in our class, and that kind of prepares you. Plus, I worked in a hospital, Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, when I was a student. So I saw a lot of blood and guts in the operating theatre. So yeah, kind of prepared me.
This is a point where I should admit that not last week, but the week before, I had to leave the vet's room because she was peeling a scab off my dog's head after it'd been knocked out. And I was like, "Oh, that's too much." She's like, "Do you want me to get somebody else in to help?" Like, yeah. So hats off to you. Like, that's you talk about getting squeamish about something trivial, and then you look at what you've dealt with.
Everybody's different, It's and what you got to look at is, so we were dealing with this is not a domestic violence one, just to tell you about seeing 3.5-year-old girl tortured and killed by a mother and boyfriend. I'm trying not to be too gory, but because of the injuries she had, we had to keep getting her out the mortuary to photograph the injuries as they developed. So did the postmortem. A couple of days later, get her back out, photograph the bite marks because the bruising was coming out, and you could take dental impressions. So that was the scenario. My exhibits officer, the person responsible for collecting exhibits and getting the body out, was a mid-30s detective, female, had a daughter that was 3.5, same age as the one we're pulling out the mortuary. So you got to think about your staff as well, And I gave it, you don't need to do this. We'll get somebody else. She was adamant, no, I can do it. I'm not affected. I'm fine. Then you sort of, well, what do I do? Do I enforce it? Is she just being brave, or is she really? There's other decisions to be made as well as, So that was a particularly nasty one for everybody involved. We got them convicted, which is good.
How do you find having the conversation with the offender? You're going through that process and having to deal with when you've got it in the back. Obviously not always in the back of your mind, but in the front of your mind, that you know what they've done and how they've done it.
Yeah, I used to interview the offenders. So the rank structure is you go detective constable, detective sergeant, detective inspector, detective chief inspector, detective superintendent. The higher you go up, the less interviewing of offenders you do. Don't look at the telly and see the senior investigating officer does house to house, he does family liaison, he interviews the offender, he arrests them. You know, it's not like it, I mean, I have interviewed since then, but that was a special case. So you brief your team that have to interview the offender. You know, the special interview teams now that level 3 and level 5, and there's all sorts of levels, but we'll go bore you with that. But so you brief your team and you always anticipate it's going to be a no reply interview, because nobody ever admits anything, even with DNA, CCTV. You know, they're like Boris Johnson, admit nothing. It's just like, fuck me, you know. It's on the telly when they started, you know, they throw down the fingerprints of the DNA. Your DNA's on the gun. Oh, that's okay, I've done it. I've had DNA, CCTV, and we've had a guy admit it to the control room, saying, I've just killed my partner, I'm at home, I've got the knife by my side, just come and get me. This is on tape to the control room. So eventually uniform going about 2 hours later, after the risk assessed everything, and he's ringing up saying, is anybody coming for me? This is one of the domestic murders I dealt with. And then you get me to interview and you think, right, so you play the tape recording to him, no comment. You've admitted it on tape that you've killed her. No comment. Solicitor, you know. Solicitor. You know, bane of our lives. So interviews, yeah, each one's different. He was a particularly arrogant, violent, what's the word? Never ever admit anything all through his career. So yeah, he was always going to be a no reply. So you gear it up to prepare all the evidence, enough to charge him. That's all you're looking for in the first instance. Enough to charge, not to convict, but just getting charged. Go to prison. Then we start collecting the sound evidence with a dead pig and other stuff that we do, and get enough evidence that he's no choice but to plead guilty and don't put the family through any more grief. Yeah, the interviews, can be quite traumatic for everybody. Yeah, we used to watch them, what we call downstream. So like we are here, I'd be watching in the corner, the interview going on, and we'd be feeding stuff. They'd have an earpiece in, feeding stuff to them, asking this question. But we generally try to avoid doing that because it's quite off-putting when you're interviewing somebody rather than you. We get them out, we watch the interview, ask them this question, the next one, on you go. So yeah, it's a bit like the telly, but not like the telly. There was, I was very much, as I went up that slippery pole of promotion, look after the officers, because I'd be one of those officers that's interviewed for 3 days with a horrible individual, and they smell after 3 days. They're in the scene, they're in the plastic suit. The solicitor's usually pretty negative, and you just need to be looked after. Here's a cup of coffee when you come out. Giving some food. Because they are at the sharp end, dealing with the horrible bastard that did the offence. So a quick example of that. I had a detective sergeant who was highly trained to deal with terrorists, murders, everything, and she interviewed, if you remember, a policewoman called Sharon Beshanevsky, got shot in Bradford at a jeweller's. Famous case. So eventually caught the offenders, but one in particular who'd shot the officer. And there was some video outside, and they had to play the video to the offender, to show him, this is you, And she said when she was watching him, his eyes were going wide, and he was getting a kick out of watching himself shooting the police officer. And that was very hard for her, as an interviewer, not to just grab him by the neck and put his head through the telly. And she came out of that. It was our Christmas do that night, and she came out eventually, and she got absolutely wasted. I've never seen a woman so wasted, but just having to sit through someone that shot one of your colleagues and, grin and smile when he's showing it on. Imagine the self-control you require. And I take my hat off to interview teams every time. It's the toughest job.
And do you have
digressing from domestic abuse here?
I was just going to kind of ask, coming back on that one. Do you have any experiences where it was female on male? I know you said none of the murders ended up, but through your career, did you see that?
But none of the murders I've dealt with, as I've gone through the ranks, I've dealt with the first one I told you about in London.
Yeah.
You know, literally had a slice mark in my tunic. We had tunics in those days, you know, with, you know, and a bit of balsa wood in your pocket, and that was it. There's the one that sticks in my mind was New Year's Eve in a town centre in one of the places I worked, and New Year is, you know, it's just like, we used to call it domestic city at New Year, because everybody falls out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll be aware of, you know, wherever you are, it's like you've been in close contact, usually over Christmas and New Year, you get drunk and you can't stand the sight of each other, and things happen. So we're walking, I was walking the beat in uniform about midnight, the bells are going, and there's just carnage in this town centre. I won't name where it is, but it's, quite famous. And there's just domestics everywhere, you know, everywhere you turn, there's people. One young girl had half her dress ripped off, she was walking around half naked. You know, he got locked up, he ripped her dress and accused her of, you know, doing something. So we've got him pointed out, walk around the corner, and there's a boy lying there on the pavement, absolutely sparkle, with a stiletto heel, a shoe embedded in his skull. Absolutely creamed him with his shoe. He wasn't seriously injured. I mean, he was sore-headed, a puncture wound, didn't go through to his brain. But you turn around and you think, huh? She's standing there with one shoe on, one shoe off, you know, so she got arrested. And so it does. But generally, the majority I dealt with, I would say 95% were male and female. The ones that, you know, as it went up in seriousness, definitely.
You talked about at the start, sort of being able to explain what the signs might be, like how people would identify it, and what should folk look out for?
Oh, there's huge list. Basically, they'll try and make you feel worthless. The guy he had on outlined just about all the things, make him feel worthless. You know, nobody else will fancy you. You're a piece of shit. You know, I'm doing you a favor by being with you. You know, they control them by money. They control them through sex, whether that be withholding it or forcing them to have sex when they don't want to. They isolate them from their friends and family. It might be a drip isolation, but generally, you'll notice that suddenly all your friends are, you know, or you don't see that particular friend anymore, and there's no reason for it. They have unexplained injuries. They'll wear clothing. In a nice summer's day like today, they'll have long sleeve tops on, so they can't see the bruising on the arms, or they've been held down, or the burn marks where they've been cigarettes stubbed out in them, stuff like that. So there's all sorts of signs. But generally, if somebody gets in a new relationship that you know, and there's always that first, that first that first start of a relationship, you can't get enough of each other. Now you do tend to ignore your mates.
Yeah,
you know, I've done it. You know, it's like, I'm seeing Alex. She's called Alex, by the way. She's Alexandra, but don't call her Alexandra. She'll punch you. She's 5'4". She's lovely. Anyway, so you do, but when it goes on and they start making excuses that they can't turn up at events, or if they do turn up, they're constantly making excuses, or they're being texted by the other half, phoned, worried about being late, worried about what they'll say, are they wearing the right thing. There's all sorts of, you know, signs out there. There's not any one that says that is a victim. Apart, you know, the obvious one is the violence. You know, if you see somebody with a black eye and they say, "Oh, a cupboard," next week, you know, they've got a big comedy lump on the head, or walked into another cupboard, then you can usually assume that they're a victim of domestic abuse. And there are lots of helps, you know, lots of voluntary groups out there and statutory groups that can help victims now. And did the chap that was on a month or two ago, did he mention those? I can't remember. There's a memory test for you.
It's a question of a famously bad memory, Jeff.
So have I, and it gets worse as you get older, can I just say. So basically, I when I came to my last posting, I had to be the liaison officer with domestic violence or domestic abuse survivor groups throughout the county. And I'd chair the meetings, and got to meet some fantastic people. And, you know, they all said the same thing, you know, just put a call in. If you think it's domestic abuse. It's probably domestic abuse. You're not being, and they'll get you out. We provided money for. We got funding from Northern Rock. That's how long ago it was, before Northern Rock became a dirty word. They were fantastic in providing money to domestic violence charities. We got safe rooms made, panic rooms for people who had been victims, worried about the partner coming back. We provided them with escape kits, like bags ready to go, all stuff like that. So if you think you are, you probably know you're a victim, but you hide it because you love the person, or you convince yourself you love them. But just ring one of there's so many charities out there that can help you and give you advice. And there's a lot of stuff online now, which, you can look at. Hide your browser history, though, if you're going to be looking at, I'm a victim of abuse, because that's the other thing. They will search all your messages. They will look at your call history. They'll check the stuff that you're looking at online, everything like that. That's a sign, again. Just about covers it.
And most web browsers now, I'm told, have an incognito mode. I believe somebody shared that with me once. I don't know why they were using it. I don't think it was for that, but
they have an incognito mode. But my wife could probably find out what you've been looking at unless you use a particular program. She examines computers for a living, mainly for paedophile stuff. But I'll say, Alex, what am I doing wrong here? She'll walk through and go, oh, press a button and walk off again.
That's it. With a shake of the head.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, So, you can, if you got to the stage where you got to hide your browser history or worry about your call log or your people you're texting or WhatsApping, then you've got a problem. Unless you're having an affair or something, or doing something you shouldn't be doing, that's a different scenario. And one of the signs of domestic abuse, they will accuse you of having an affair out the blue, or they themselves will have an affair in front of you, make it quite obvious that they're having someone else. That's all part of the control, and it's all about control, as I keep coming back to. So you control them by their messaging, by what they're looking at on the computer, stuff like that.
It's absolutely fascinating, Jeff. We're out of time, and I wish we weren't, because
I thought we'd be struggling to fill 40 minutes. I apologize. We've only talked about one case or two briefly.
I could. We'll if you're okay with it, we'll get you back on and repeat this in a couple of weeks' time, because it's fascinating. I've thoroughly enjoyed one of the best episodes I've listened to. Thank you so much for your time. I can talk about police work, so you've got to stop me sometimes, because it's I love my job, because I dealt with what I joined the force for, to put bad people away, and I ended up doing that. I wasn't shoving paper clips or anyway, but there's a couple of cases I would like to talk to you about, just to show the different. That one I talked about was an extreme one, but there's ones where the control is less obvious, but it was there. Yeah. We'll get you on for part 2 maybe next week then, if you're free.
I'll do my best. But nice talking to you. Thanks for having me on, by the way.
And thank you, Charlie. Thanks for joining us as well.
No worries. Thanks for having me back on.
No worries. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with a bit of a lighter mood on Thursday. So I think I can probably announce who our guests. We've got Tam Cowan joining us for Shortbangers on Thursday. Really? I can't tell you how excited I am for it, because I'm a big fan of Off the Ball. I'll tell you, it's all fair. We know that Tam shared with us just to confirm he was coming on. So in the meantime, thanks for listening. Get your questions in, and we'll see you next time.
They trailed me down when I broke free. I drank all the whiskey in Tennessee.